Hell yeah, now we're live.
Ooh, look at us.
I know, isn't that exciting?
We're doing it.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back, and also welcome to because we did this before, but no, we're sticking to it this time. I promise.
Just like a 39-year-old woman having her fifth 39th birthday.
Exactly.
We're on our fourth episode 1 of the podcast.
That's right. And this is the Little Dicey podcast. My name is Salvatore. This is Matthew. We're going to be your hosts here on the podcast. And yeah, like we said, this is like our fourth episode 1 of this. Mostly just because schedules and all that stuff, and the way like weird things work with like your Twitch numbers and stats and stuff. We were trying to reach partner on the channel in general, and we were doing really well with our main show, which is if for some reason you're here and you don't watch our main show, which is wild, hi. But our main show, which is our actual play Dungeons and Dragons show on this channel, that is the priority. And so we didn't want to like dilute the average viewers that we get on the channel, but we said fuck it at this point. And I changed my mind about that because I just want to talk with my buddy about the game that I love so much and other mechanics and stuff involving that. So
everything's content.
Everything is content. Very true. I just want to say what up to Michaela, our producer. They're not here right now. Usually Michaela's running the chat and everything, but it's just me and Matt today, so we won't be able to type anything, but we can see the chat. We've turned the monitor around and we have eyes on it. So I just want to say what's good to Michaela. Next week we will definitely have appropriate starting soon screens and like the usual accoutrement that comes with this channel, like an overlay and all that, to sort of match our additional shows like Reroll. And next week I will also be starting my Let's Play for sure, 100%. It was a matter of like making sure that I had stuff at the apartment as well, sure, so I wasn't messing anything up. But getting all that out of the way, we got a podcast, man. Isn't that fun? We're just like anybody else. We just started.
Yep. I'm always reminded of the College Humor skit.
Oh yeah, like starting a podcast. Yeah, hilarious. Yeah. Fucking shout out to College Humor. I can't actually. I know College Humor.
College Humor.
I can't see all the way over there because I can't see all the way over to chat because I'm a little far away in my eyesight.
Queer at the Roundtable is here.
Yes, Queer at the Roundtable. I believe they jumped in on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because we had lovely Dominic Noble. Shouts out to Dominic Noble, man, for coming around all the way from LA for no other reason than to play. No, I'm just kidding. No, it was a very cool, fun time. So, what's up? Good to see you. If you're joining us here, this is our first episode of our first episode of this podcast. Basically, what you can expect here is Matt and I to just sort of sit and talk some shit about Dungeons and Dragons in general, game design, storytelling philosophy, all that jazz. But today, for the first episode, we are going to be focusing entirely on the idea of homebrew, and just sort of original, or quote unquote original. I mean, I steal a lot of stuff anyways, or take inspiration from, rather.
Sure.
But focusing on original creations and original ideas for your and our Dungeons and Dragons game. So if you're a dungeon master, or even if you're just a player if you're just a little tiny player and that's it, that's all you are. No.
Yes.
But if you're a dungeon master or a player and you are interested in creating your own really anything in the game, any part of the game, whether it be campaign as a dungeon master or item, character, feature, or anything like that, subclass, class, we're going to be talking about a lot of it today. We might not touch on everything, but if you are in chat and you're like, oh, I have a question about this, or I have an idea about that, please let us know. We're reading chat as best we can. Michaela apparently is working on the overlay and stuff now, so thank you, Michaela. We appreciate that. Well, you can definitely expect that next week. I'm not going to worry about trying to get it down right now, but it's whatever. Yeah. So that being said,
we started 4 minutes early because we were just so hungry.
I just want to start, man. I want to get into it. First and foremost, I want to talk to you, Matt, about just sort of where you and I started kind of collaborating on different things about our game. I'll take you back like 2 years now. Has it been something like that, right?
Something like that.
Like that. Because fun fact, obviously we all are dealing with and have dealt primarily with the pandemic that's going around right now. And obviously we, we're in lockdown for a while, a year and a half, a couple of years ago. The day that we had planned to, I love telling this because I think it's hilarious. Mm-hmm. The day that we had planned to play our very first session of Dungeons and Dragons 2 years ago was the exact day that the very first full lockdown in the United States ended up being put in place. And that party was completely different. We had the only OGs from that original session are you and Jenna that are still with the party now 2 years later, which is awesome. And we were all meant to, I don't even remember where we were supposed to meet. We were supposed to meet at Clay's.
Yeah, I don't remember.
I don't remember at all. We were supposed to meet somewhere. I don't even think it was here because the studio wasn't built. Oh, maybe your house. Yeah, because we had done a couple board game nights.
Yeah, because originally we talked about like, hey, let's sprinkle this in
with our board game
maybe
nights,
like once a month, whatever.
Yeah, we were going to play once a month. And that turned out to, because we were remote and we didn't have anything else to do, it turned out to be once a week. So that was a really good time. And that blossomed into this. But even on the first sort of few times that we were playing, when we were coming up with your first character, you had played Dungeons and Dragons before, but for the intents and purposes of us playing together, I'm huge into homebrew, especially with like my campaigns, but because you hadn't returned to the game in such a long time, and the additions are different and all that, I was very excited that you wanted to start off with like, all right, well, I want to change a few things about what's going on with my character because I want it to feel a little bit different. Also, I don't really like how this feels, but let's talk a little bit about how we put together, mostly you, but how we put together Revelry, your first character.
Yeah, I think... Yeah, it's been a while. I know that I definitely gravitated towards the Warlock class first. And I came up with the very original idea of a tiefling warlock, with a little bit of a sad boy background.
When it works, baby.
Yeah. And yeah, we kind of like talked about a few different classes. And one thing that or subclasses, I should say, because warlocks, of course, get that at level 1. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've always, been really into in games and story and things is sort of like having these kind of like backstory things that are fleshed out. And so we tossed around a couple different backstory ideas. Some were a little sillier than others, and we ended up going with. And I basically had this idea of kind of a religious leader,
right?
And we ended up settling on Hexblade basically because I was like, hey, what's a Hexblade? And you were like, they're fucking dope. And I was like,
Hexblade
right.
Warlocks are ill. Very cool subclass.
Yeah, and then Hexblade, generally is thought of like a blade, like a sword wielding warlock. And I think probably the discussion started around me asking you like, hey, can I have like a priest smiter or like a sort of a staff with like a religious symbol on top, and could that be my weapon? And that's probably the first sort of divergence from what you would typically do, which is not a mechanical divergence, but it is sort of a a flavor divergence, and then we kind of went from there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so funny how that happens. The biggest thing I think is hopefully if you are a player and either you're just sort of starting into the game or you've been playing for a little while, maybe you've done 1 or 2 campaigns with a specific dungeon master or whoever, if you're a player and you want to change a few things, starting with flavor is the easiest thing in the world, because myself as a dungeon master, if you want to reskin something, like I literally don't give a fuck. Like that's great. Like, you know what I mean? As long as we're not dipping into levels of like, oh, I want to do this, so then I have to change this full mechanic, and then it ends up being like, all right, well, fuck, we have to do balancing issues and stuff, which is fine. What's up, Aaron? Good to see you. Thanks for hopping in. But starting with reskinning or flavor options is perfect. It's such an easy way to like get into the homebrewing of the game, which is such a huge part of why I really love playing the game, is to come up with cool shit with my friends and write fun things. But that in particular, that one change going from like, all right, well, Hexblade is usually a sword or some sort of like, you know, slashing or stabbing weapon, and changing that to a staff and you know, in essence, and then from there I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. From there I was like, well, I wanted to do some other shit too. You know what I mean? Like, because a sword is cool already, and then getting to have your subclass do some really cool shit with it already sort of lends itself to where I'm like, all right, we don't really need to come up with additional stuff with that unless you have an idea. But once you said that, I was like, oh, okay, well, what could make this staff special, right? Is it just that you just want to have a staff? It's like, well, I would like to see that be a little bit more not interesting, but you know what I mean, a little bit more convoluted, I guess is a better word. And so after that, I sort of decided like, oh, it would be cool if the reason you made this pact was because of like whatever specific instance. I love you know, I take inspiration from all types of different things, and obviously I grew up I don't know how obvious it is, but I know that you know this, but I grew up in a Lutheran household, so if you're not familiar with that, it's like the opposite of a Catholic, which is hilarious because I'm Italian, so like I'm like this like diamond in the rough. No, but I grew up.
Stop it! We're gonna start tail spinning.
I know, right? Yeah, you're right. But anyway, so I grew up in a Christian Lutheran household and was raised that way. And I went to elementary school and high school in private Christian schools. And so like a big part of like the zeitgeist of my imagination has to do with like, you know, the usual biblical themes and stuff. And so the idea of being tempted by a snake is, I think, a really fun, you know, way to start with that kind of stuff. So I like to go with those sorts of easy things. So I was like, oh, well, you know, and even further, like the story of Moses and how he approached Pharaoh, and Pharaoh's magicians were like, oh, we can do miracles too. And they changed their staffs into snakes. And then the story goes that the prophet Moses used his staff, turned it into a real snake, like really like without magic. God, through Moses, turned his staff into a snake. And then that snake ate the other snakes that the Pharaoh's magicians like conjured or whatever, and then turned back into a staff after doing that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like turning a staff into a snake is already also another cool sort of reference. And then a snake tempting you is obviously one of the bigger references. And so we sort of took that and ran with it. And then subsequently, as you got different and new and more interesting weapons to attach yourself to as that Hexblade Warlock, it always retained that being able to turn into some sort of a familiar, which I really like that through thread, you know what I mean? And that's just an example of how like homebrew can start off small and just an idea of like, oh, well, I just would rather my character kind of look like this instead. And then that turns into an actual mechanical, interesting quirk or choice about like how your character works. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it was, I mean, ostensibly, what you added from a mechanic standpoint is the ability to kind of create sort of a limited familiar, right? Which is a very powerful thing, but because it was limited in the type of creature it could be, which is a snake. And it was probably limited in like, I think it was once per long rest or something. Something like that. So it's kind of like, it's a way to add utility without adding like pure number increases or extra damage or extra to hit, that kind of stuff. And so it was very exciting. It was very thematic. And, you know, like you were saying, the snake eating the other snakes, as I would attune to other weapons, we would watch my snake staff eat the new weapon and then transform. And it was just very exciting. And yeah, it was very, very cool.
Yeah. And I like, I thought it was also like a cool sort of spin-off, because like it's very difficult to I mean, I'm a huge fan of a lot of different medias, and so it's difficult to have completely original ideas. And a thing in the back of my head was, because the entire time that we were playing that first campaign, I was always thinking of like, well, I know I want to live stream this somehow, and obviously we eventually did that with what we have going on now. But that first campaign never really saw the light of day when I wanted it to, which was sort of those like earlier levels at Red Keep and stuff like that, because I really liked that saga. But in the back of my mind, I was always like, oh, like I didn't want to write something where like I didn't want the reattuning process to be simply, all right, I'm going to take a short rest and this is my Hexblade weapon now, and like that's it. Yeah. It's like that's kind of boring, even though technically how it's written, like you have to come up with that if you want to come up with some sort of ritual. Really, it's just you just unattune and reattune and choose it, right? So mechanically, that's all it is. But I mean, if you want your players to be more engaged with the story, which I think is always the goal, coming up with flavor or any sort of reason to make a mechanic for their class or for their race or for their character in general to be impactful, either role-playing wise or just, description wise, it's always going to make them a little bit more interested in what's going on. And so I was like worried that like, well, the most well-known thing with like, at the very least, like the niche Hexblade Warlock thing is, in Critical Role, Travis Willingham's character was a Hexblade, and the way Matt Mercer would describe his reattunement was he would have a sort of nightmare where he would eat the weapon. Right. And that is really only as a result of Travis not understanding like what Matt was going for the first time and deciding to try to eat his sword.
Absolutely gullet the sword.
Yeah, and then Matt was like, fuck it, that's just how it works now. And it was hilarious, and it was just like, oh shit. Which is very cool that they just the both of them just sort of rolled with that, so to speak. And so I was like, well, hopefully if this ever gets streamed, people won't be like, oh, it's just, but I thought it was unique enough and referential to, like the story of like Moses and stuff that it makes sense that, and I just thought it was fucking cooler, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think the lesson is like, there are, I'm sure, thousands of items of officially licensed, items between all the source books in 5e. There's really no reason to just be like, I want to make a weapon that does damage plus effect or whatever, right? Yeah. Right. So I think, and I think you would co-sign this, is like the real reason to do homebrew is to support a fantasy.
Right, exactly. Right?
Your player has a specific fantasy and there's nothing in the book that lets them do that specific fantasy, or you as a DM have a specific fantasy. And in this case, you have a player that wants to basically have this sort of like, acolyte / potential prophet type character. And you have this thing as a DM that resonates with you, which is this story, and you use homebrew to effectively display that fantasy in the game. And it's like, I was never excited to have that weapon because I was like, ooh, it's so powerful.
Right.
It was like, no, I just wanted to see this staff turn into a snake and eat another weapon.
Yeah, it's fucking cool.
Hell,
that was sick. I mean? Yeah.
And I have a Catholic background, and so like the story resonated, with me to some degree as well. And yeah, so like, don't rack your head to recreate the wheel. Do something for kind of a specific purpose to support a particular fantasy.
For sure. And speaking of stories that resonate and all that, I mean, there are some really cool source material that you can find, whether it just be from Wizards of the Coast or even, I mean, there's a website, dmsguild.com, that I frequent every once in a while when I'm like, I just kind of need like a little dungeon crawl encounter for like this part of the campaign, or I just need like, what's a cool side quest that I can sort of put together that I just don't feel like writing right now. You know what I mean? If you want to X out of that, by the way, just something popped up. I use those not scanned now. Yeah, just there you go. Thank God. But yeah, like there's so much source material that you can find. However, there really only are so few that are actually like interesting to play, in my opinion. Like if you are just like a fiend for D&D and you don't want to like write your own campaign, that's totally fine, or it's totally cool, and just like get whatever source book. But like, and I've read a lot of them.
The modules.
Yeah. I've read a lot of them. I can really only think of
reading.
like, what's that?
Little light bathroom.
Yeah,
reading.
light bathroom reading. That's right. Yeah. I'm on the toilet for a long time.
What are you doing in there? Nothing, Mom.
Nothing, Mom. I'm reading my source books. I legitimately can only think of two that are actually like intriguing, and I don't know. Like, I mean, if
that are like evoking something, that like gets you excited to play them.
Exactly. I mean, one of them's Curse of Strahd, and I think that's probably the most well-known one out of all of them. And the other one recently is the one that Critical Role put out in like combination, or I think it's just Matt Mercer. I don't know how intertwined the company is, but they put out with Wizards of the Coast. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I think it's called The Netherdeep. That is actually very interesting. Like, I read the whole thing and I was like, I would run this. I think this is really cool. But anything else, like fucking like Storm King's Thunder or whatever the fuck, or you know, all that other shit, like I just think they're boring. Like, it's a good thing to have and to look at if you're just starting out DMing and all that, so you understand structure and you understand how to balance a ability check, or like when to use skill checks or stuff like that, or it's a good thing to look at like map drawing wise, or just like looking at like little ideas of character, like that, all that's in there. But the stories themselves are just kind of shit, to be honest with you. I'm just like, I would never run this.
I'm sure it depends too, like if you have a you know, if you have like it goes back to the supporting the fantasy, right? If you're like, dude, I just want to like fight some fucking giants,
yeah, right? Then fuck yeah, dude.
You know, then you probably maybe want to check out that particular module, you know. Isn't that how he learned new spells too?
Revelry? How Revelry?
Garrett says that he played Rime of the Frost Maiden recently, and it was decently fun.
Oh yeah, so Rime of the Frost Maiden. So what I will say is the two sort of starting books that they have, Mines of Fendelver and Rime of the Frost Maiden, are good for like what they are. Like for new players to start off with, great. I usually recommend, like, if everyone is new in the group and you're all just trying to like play the game, I mean, that's what I did when I first started, like 6 years ago or 7 years ago now, when I first started DMing. I just got Lost Mines and I played it with my friends, and we barely knew what we were doing, but we were having fun. You know what I mean? And Rime of the Frost Maiden does a really good job with that same idea. What I will say about those, though, they sort of represent how you're just excited to play, which is enough, always enough, right? As long as your players are excited to play the game, you're doing a good job. Those only evoke the idea that they're excited to play Dungeons and Dragons, not that they're excited to play the campaign. Does that make sense?
Okay.
And that might not be true,
but because they're sort of like classic, sort of like loot the dungeon type adventures.
More or less, like there's not a lot of like the stuff that titillates me or you when it comes to, but again, that's not what everybody's looking for. But and when you're first starting off, just the idea that the players are excited to play the game and the DM is like excited to present the game to them is always going to be enough. And they do a very good job of hooking people for sure. And when you're done with those, or you know, you get to a point where you guys are like, oh, okay, like I think we're ready to like do something entirely our own, it gives you a very good base to hop off of, you know what I mean? So yeah, some good shit.
Well, and again, if like the thing that you sort of gets you excited to run a campaign is the homebrewing, then probably don't run a module. It's probably going to be boring for you. You know, if the thing that, you know, gets you off is just like getting together with your friends and playing the game and having a few beers or whatever,
do the module 100%.
Then, like, you know, a module is an easy place to start off. I think, like, at the end of the day, for me, I just think that the default should just be sort of like official licensed content, because you know that it's going to be balanced and it's there for you, and there's
structured well.
There's kind of no reason not to have that be your default, unless there's something about it that isn't satisfying, which might be that I have this specific character concept that isn't supported by the official content, or I have this adventure in mind which there's no module that I can modify a little to meet my fantasy, and so I'm gonna homebrew a campaign.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. We're gonna continue with the sort of idea of linearly walking through examples of our homebrew situations, and
I feel railroaded.
Well, that's all there is. This episode of the podcast is completely on the tracks, and that's it. We're not going else. But we talked a little bit about how we came up with your first character, Revelry, which was a Tiefling Warlock subclass, Hexblade, and your second character in the overarching sort of experience of our Dungeons and Dragons games together was a wizard called Misha, who's been one of my favorite characters that you've come up with, and just in general that I've played with, because Misha was super interesting. And Misha sort of was the next step from Revelry, like the idea of like homebrewing Revelry. We didn't necessarily homebrew the class for Misha. We used one of Critical Role's colleges, I think, for the wizards.
The chronologist.
But pretty much everything else about Misha was very specific to the character that you wanted to create.
Sure.
And so we've talked about this before in other episodes, just how we came up with the character, so we don't need to get into that. But I loved the idea of, because it was sort of mid-tier, like a mid-level, right? I think, what level was he? I think 7 or 8?
We created him at level 8 or 8 or 9. In fact, it was 9 because Revelry left the party, and immediately after he left, everybody else leveled up to 9.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. So we got to make a level 9. Well, you made him primarily, but obviously, there's always going to be a level of collaboration with the dungeon master, just to make sure that your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, and nothing is like ridiculous. Which wasn't the case. It usually isn't the case when you're making a character. But once we sort of had the idea of who this person was, figuring out, because you're level 9, you need to have some actual interesting equipment and like quote unquote magic items. It's like that's the question that everybody makes when they're ask their DM when they're making a character. It's like, can I get a magic item? And it's all right, well, you're level 1, so no, but I'll make this cute little thing for you, and it maybe won't be super mechanically powerful, but like it'll be unique to you, which is probably one of the best examples of homebrew in general, is just making something unique to your player that isn't going to break the game or make the other players be like, well, why the fuck is this character so powerful out of fucking nowhere? You know what I mean? But because we're level 9, we got to play around a lot more with that. Yep. And one of my favorite things that has been used in the game was the spatial render. Yeah, because that shit was fucking cool. Yeah, I loved that weapon. I thought it was super,
blade.
Yeah, the Astra blade. Yeah. And
that's such a funny story. The genesis of that sword too is we had art commissioned for Misha. We had already had some art drawn up for the rest of the party, and then Revelry went off to do other things, and so we had some art made for Misha the wizard, and the product that was sent to us was gorgeous.
Oh my God, so beautiful.
But it reminded me of, anyway, I'm not gonna get into it, but gorgeous. And but in the art, this wizard has a sword on his back.
Yep.
And it was so funny how we approached it. It was like the options are either to go back to the arts and be like, can you get rid of this fucking sword? Because why does it have a sword? Yeah. Or I think both of our reactions, well, I guess we need a wizard sword now.
Yeah.
And so that's a great example of, first of all, there might be some wild spellcaster swords that exist. I don't know, but they're probably like legendary if they exist. Probably not appropriate for that level character. So here's a specific fantasy. We have a mid-level wizard that needs to have a reason to carry a fucking sword.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so those are the design criteria. And so, you set off to homebrew a sword that a wizard would want to carry.
Yeah. And the sort of easiest part of like doing that, I'm going to actually try to pull it up. I don't know if I have it still in D&D Beyond. Okay. In my little repertoire, but I'm pretty sure I do.
Okay.
But it was super easy to come up with like why he would have the sword. The hard part, which is always the hard part in homebrew, the easiest part is thinking of, what you want to include. the hard part is fucking balancing it, right? Obviously. And so once we figured out, like, all right, so we at the very least want to have it be wielded by you without you having to be like, all right, well, how the fuck do we make it work to where I can have, like, you know, the martial training to have this, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes I really don't like just being like, fuck it, you just have, you fuck it, we don't need to come up with a reason, you just can use swords. And it's like, all right, a little bit lazy, you know what I mean? But not the worst thing in the world if you just want to cut right to the chase. But we figured out, like, oh, a really cool idea would be that you're not even wielding the sword at all. You are simply activating it, and then the whole idea of this sword was that it would be activated by you, and then it would basically move on its own, right? There's a weapon in the game already in the Dungeon Master's Guide called the Dancing Sword, where you just sort of activate it and it goes on its own. You don't have to worry about using it. But there was, so obviously you start with that, but there's a very specific sort of identifiable quirk about this sword that is perfectly intertwined with your character and the type of wizard that he was and the things that he was interested in that made it all the more interesting.
By the way, I think I remember what it does if you...
oh, yeah, tell me. I mean, go for it.
Yeah, so, like, first of all, it's, as you were just saying, you don't want to just say wizards can use swords now. So first you need a reason to make it... you could have actually done it where, like, you just can't use it as a sword.
True.
In this case, you chose not to. So, so it let me basically use it, attack with it using my intelligence modifier as a wizard, which just makes sense.
Right. Makes total sense.
So it lets you use it as a blade, which rarely did. Just kind of on its own.
Right.
There's also an ability to sort of, as a reaction, do kind of like a parry. So it could add, I think, 1 to my AC. So just a little buff, if needed. But then the key thing is, when I used it as an attack, if I hit with it once per day, it could do kind of a big effect, which was themed around sort of like space-time, which was the whole deal with this particular wizard. And so first of all, options are always fun. Even when sometimes there's one that's kind of like the standout default, it's always fun to have options for specific scenarios. And basically the 3 options were, I have it right in front of me now. So there was an option called fear, which basically is this? I don't actually remember that one, but also, okay, now.
Oh, cool. There you go.
So there's fear, which basically they took a little damage and then would have to, like, spend their time running away from me. Displacement, which is the one that I used most often, which is when I hit them, it sort of like opened up a kind of a portal and sent them 60 feet in any direction,
which was super tight.
Which was very fun. My favorite use of that was when I hit that giant. And sent him 60 feet into the air and right above the goblin sorcerer, the goblin shaman or whatever. That was very fun.
Super fun.
And then the lock option, which is so if displacement is sort of the space option, lock is sort of the time option, which sort of froze them in place, incapacitating them for a turn. So yeah, that was a very, very cool and thematic sword for a wizard.
Hell yeah. And I think the reason for the fear option was and I usually, when I'm like writing these items, I always try to include at least one sentence of like a flavor or a lore reason or whatever. And so the idea of displacement being the spatial aspect of that, because you were a space-time wizard, and then the lock being the time thing, like you said, and then fear was the sort of like the irregularity like aspect, like the wild nature of like dealing with these subjects that people like don't usually deal with. And so the first sentence for the fear option,
their brain.
Exactly. It says the target is exposed to a horrific vision from the astral sea. So it's like the astral sea in general in Dungeons and Dragons is associated with like abnormalities and like all this crazy shit. And like, there's the common trope in Dungeons and Dragons where like if you're in the astral sea for long enough, you just fucking go nuts and that's it. And so the idea of like playing around with like, well, if you fuck with space time enough and you're not prepared for it, it will fuck you up mentally. I like the idea of having that option to inflict that against someone as like through your weapon or whatever, especially if you can minorly, control space and time in a minor way with this weapon, why not also be able to have the option to like expose people to the reality of like too much is, sometimes, or too, a lot of something is, sometimes detrimental. So I like to include that. Unfortunately, it was rarely used, but I thought it was a fun idea anyways. And sometimes, sometimes you can just do shit for yourself. I like doing a lot. I like writing a lot of stuff in my campaigns. I'm just like, this is for me. And if the players, encounter it and they like it, then awesome. But I just like to write these small little things in there. So, but so why don't we jump into a little bit now that we've talked about like sort of like the.
Actually, there's one more bit of homebrew about Misha that I'd like.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it.
Speaking of the fantasy, there was, and so I watched the first, let's say, 40 episodes of Critical Role Campaign 2, where they debuted the Chronologist.
Right.
And so, as can happen, because Chronologist was designed for this setting and this story, I can't say that like a chronologist doesn't fulfill the fantasy of what it meant to be a chronologist in Exandria, right? Because I don't know, I didn't see that part of the story
exactly. Yeah,
but what I can say that for me is, to be honest, it often didn't fulfill the fantasy for me of a time mage.
Sure.
And I grew up playing like Final Fantasy games, and there's sort of like iconic things that I would expect a character who can manipulate time to be able to do.
Right. Their body looks like a clock. Yeah. Their nose is just a little, and then they have like a little top hat.
They speak with a French accent.
They do, but the person that is like the person that controls them and sends them out speaks with a Brooklyn accent that makes no fucking sense. And so anytime you show up, you just hear in the back, "Time Wizard!" That was a Yu-Gi-Oh reference. That was a convoluted Yu-Gi-Oh reference. And I'm very proud of that.
Get in the comments.
That was one of the best references I could have ever made. That one was for me, not for anybody else.
Sometimes you just do it for you.
That's right.
So anyway, so for me, it felt a lot like they were sort of manipulating like luck almost. And I think what I've inferred is that the chronologist was more about selecting realities out of like an infinite multiverse, right?
Right.
So like, if everything that could happen will happen, you are plucking the result or the version of the splitting
that
of the
you
tree
prefer.
that you prefer, right? But that wasn't really evoking the fantasy that I wanted, which is someone that's actually manipulating
turn it forward and turn it back like a dial
in their timeline, right? And so it, if I don't want to say if I could go back and do it differently, but like, I think it could be argued that I could design a completely different subclass that is actually Time Wizard and not Chronologist, and it would feel very different.
Yeah.
But the one thing that we did figure out is I came to you with an idea for a homebrew spell that was achieving this ability that there's an ability from the Final Fantasy series in particular. I think of it from Final Fantasy Tactics called Quick, and basically what it is the Time Mage uses their turn to make somebody else go now, go next. So it's a very innocuous ability, right? One character is exchanging their readiness for another character's readiness, but tactically, it's such an interesting idea.
Oh, yeah.
Like, okay, the cleric just went, but we really need that healing word, so I'm going to make them go like again right now. Or the bad guy is about to go, and I'm going to actually make him not ready to go.
Right.
So he's got to wait his turn. So we were able to work on a spell that sort of fucked with the initiative order, which is something that is not a system or mechanic that really exists.
No, it doesn't at all.
And I think that the end result was not only like tactically really interesting for me, who's sort of a gamer and I like tactical options,
right?
But I think was very thematic, and it got good reactions to the table when when it was like, okay, I'm spending my whole turn to cast this spell, but now you get to go right now, and Jen would be like, I get to go again?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, dude.
So yeah, that's how dope the spell is.
I sped your ass up.
That's
right.
I
created a little time pocket around you that moved faster than the time around everybody else, and suddenly you're ready to go, my man.
Yeah, which is again, that's just a great example of like, well, I just want to have something that the game just doesn't provide for me right now. And then, you know, I mean, that is stepping, which is a great little segue. It's stepping more towards like the advanced side of homebrew, because once you get to a certain point in homebrewing things, it becomes less reskinning, which is the easiest way to homebrew something, and it becomes more like now you have to learn game mechanics. You have to learn how to balance things, and we've done a pretty good job. I mean, primarily it's you who comes up with these ideas, and then I try my best to, because I know like the stats behind the screen, and like, all right, so like I know that if you do this much in this short of time, that's going to like fuck with the balancing issues and stuff. So it's easier for me to like finely tune things. But you've been working on some stuff that is just really, really awesome, because again, you have a really good eye for seeing what is not provided for, but what is not accounted for within the parameters of the game right now. So like one thing which was great with Misha, was like you said, the messing with the initiative. There were really only two ways you could do that in the game raw, which is modifying your initiative bonus, which is just either a dexterity mod or like any additional thing that you get from a subclass. Like the War Mage, you can add your intelligence modifier to your initiative roll on top of your dex check. So that's one way. There was some other ways that you could add on to your roll, which establishes the initiative order. But the only way to affect the initiative, and you're not really affecting the initiative, but the only way to affect when you chose to take an action during the initiative is to choose to hold your action and forego the rest of your turn, so that you could use your reaction, which you're also foregoing in favor of whatever action you're trying to hold. So like, for example, if people aren't familiar with this, or if they think it works a different way, this is how holding an action works. Your turn comes up, and maybe the enemy is a dragon and you are a barbarian, and you do not have a way to hit the dragon because they're flying around. So you're like, all right, well, I literally can't do anything this turn. So I want to wait until I can do something, which in essence is a trigger that you're looking for. So the trigger is the dragon gets close enough to you that you can hit him, right? So you hold your action, meaning you completely forgo doing anything on your turn, except for movement or a bonus action, which you can't do really much as a barbarian anyways. You move and then you stop, and the action that you were going to take, which is probably attack, you hold on to. Mechanically, it is not a free action to then use that held action, right? We need a mechanical way for you to do that later. That comes in the form of a reaction, which you can take as long as you have an option to react to something as a character. Things like that include Hellish Rebuke, which is a spell that when you're hit, you can react to, so immediately do something to, right? You use your reaction, which everyone gets one in a round, to use the action that you set a trigger for. The most common reaction that you can take in a round is called an opportunity attack. When a creature or person moves away from you that was in your melee range, you can attack them. That is one reaction you can take on a round. You can't do any other reaction until the next round comes around. However, if you are the barbarian that holds their action to attack the dragon that is flying around, and there's a kobold to the left of you that moves out of the way, you cannot react to that kobold running out of the way, because you are using your reaction waiting for the dragon. So you're giving up something, right? So that is the only way that you can modify, and you're not even modifying the initiative. It's the only way you can modify doing something on your turn and doing it later. So figuring out a way that we can modify the initiative order without like breaking the game, right? Because something you need to balance it to where the cost of doing this needs to be high enough so that it justifies the result of literally basically giving someone an extra turn, right? The cost of using haste as a spell is that once the spell ends, whoever the spell is affecting immediately is immobilized for either a round or a minute. I don't remember how long, but either way, it's still fucked. Like once the spell ends, you are completely useless. But the bonus of doing that is you basically get to take almost another half turn on your turn, right? And your movement is doubled, which is fucking awesome.
So, anytime you start messing with like action economy, you have to be really careful. And I would just say that like if you're homebrewing something that presents a new like an entirely new way to interact with the game, such as like messing with initiative order or whatever, I would say that like I would err on the side of making it seem less powerful, just because it's inherently powerful because it's the only way to do a thing.
Right.
And then just see if your players use it.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. If your players don't use it, then it's
if the players don't use it, then you probably maybe can give it a little bit more. But if they're using it, then it's probably good. Like I said, like at first it seems like, okay, in this case we made it a second level spell. Like to cash in a second level spell slot to just exchange my turn for somebody else's doesn't seem very powerful.
Right. Like
from an action economy, you're breaking even.
Right.
You're not really accomplishing anything. But the tactical advantage of the options that it presented were interesting enough that it's a spell that I don't think I used it. Like I didn't use it every combat.
No.
But when I used it, it was very satisfying.
Yes. The idea of creating a spell or a system or some sort of option that is niche enough to where you're not going to use it all the time, but when it happens, feels really good to use, is probably the best case scenario. I don't like coming up with things that are so good that you're just like, you would never use anything else. You know what I mean? Like, why would, like, if for whatever, I'm not going to give an example.
That's part of the reason. That's part of the problem with some of the official content. Yeah, is that it's so
some of the official content is so good and and other things are just dog shit that we're like, why the fuck would I take anything? We were literally just talking about this, which is a perfect segue into linearly your next character, which is your current character right now, Kill the Turtle. There's a thing about turtles in the game, which is sort of a racial ability that they can hide in their shells, which is great. However, there was just sort of not mechanically, but it just felt bad to do that because you can't really do it. You're prone and all this other extra shit. And it's like, I understand the big bonus that you get from it is great, but like the negatives of it is it's just too much where you're like, oh, this kind of feels bad. But now we're sort of coming up with, and you're wonderful at coming up with feats specifically. And we can, if we have enough time, we can get into the stuff that you're coming up with in general, but, might not have a lot of time for that. We might be able to say that for later content. But specifically with Kill, originally we tried to figure out a way like, all right, well, what can we take away from this, on the negative side to where it feels better to use, but isn't so fucking good that you're never coming out of your shell. You know what I mean? Which would be kind of impossible unless I just straight up was like, well, you have a shell, so you get plus X to your AC. It's like, okay, no, you know what I mean? Right. But now that we were talking, so what you just mentioned about, or what we just said about like some things in the game feeling so fucking powerful that why would you take anything else? Feats have such a huge problem with that. And what you're working on right now with the scalable feats, I think solves a lot of those problems. But just in general, like if you look at the raw feats for 5th edition right now, over half of them suck. Yeah. And like not in like a fun, cool, like flirty way of getting sucked, but horrible. But in like a damn, I fucking slammed my big toe through a door and down a sink. Like,
I just love getting sucked in a flirty way.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, man.
Fun flirty way.
In a fun flirty way, just getting sucked.
Holy shit. That's
yeah. So
yeah, and the thing that is like, and this happens with some of the subclasses too, frankly, is like you have a specific fantasy, right? My character is this thing, and then you look at the thing designed to evoke that thing. Yep. I'll go back and say this in a more elegant way. Sure. And you're like, I still don't want that. Right. Like as an example, there's a official feat called Chef, right?
Yes.
And if you want to make a chef character and then you read the chef feat, you're like, I'm still not taking this because it is dog shit.
Yeah. It doesn't. Yeah. It's nothing.
You know, like if I'm, you know, I guess if like, hey, I'm a strength-based fighter. I got my big sword. Like that's what I'm about. But on the side, you know, I like to make an omelet.
Yeah,
you know,
I fucking love an omelet.
Then like maybe, but if you're like, dude, like no, what I want to be primarily is a fucking chef. Like I want my culinary skills to be a key part of my character. And then you look at the chef feat, you're like, I can't take this. Right, fucking blow.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And like my problem with it is like so many of those feats are so fun, but you just can't justify. You're like, there's the poisoner feat, right? And like Kill right now is somebody that like fucks with poison. Yeah. But I would never take the poisoner feat because it sucks.
Right. It's horrible.
You know, like there's so many feats like that. And subclasses too, where you're like, hey, I'd love to play I'd love to play an assassin, and then you look at the assassin subclass and you're like, yeah, but should I?
Yeah, assassin is just
should
like
I just pick one of the other subclasses and just flavor it as an assassin?
It should be one of the better like I really do believe that like some subclasses just need to be better than others, but the ones that are, when I say better, I mean like combat wise, like damage output or like damage options. Some just need to be better than others because not every class should be just fucking gnarly as shit, you know what I mean? But the subclasses that are quote unquote not as effective in combat need to be filling niches left and right? Like an assassin, you're an assassin and that's what you're fucking good for. So you should be probably one of, if not the best melee damage dealers in the game that also like feels really good to play. It really doesn't. Like
I think the thing with assassin is like, and I know that there's these like fucking Frankenstein monster multi-class builds where it's like 3 levels of assassin, 3 levels of gloomstalker, 3 levels of this, 3 levels of that, and then it's like 500 damage in a round, and it's like, okay, fucking cool, but like, do you think that anybody like was, when they were making that, was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to do 3 like, you know what I mean? It's like, no, they weren't. Right. Yeah. And there's I don't want to get into all the problems with like various subclasses, but anyway, so like what the fuck are we talking about?
We were talking about things that like we were talking about just subclasses in general that are like feel so powerful, or feats and things in general that feel really good, that why would you go with anything else?
And so I think to like rewind all the way back when we were talking about even like spells or actions that are just like fucking shit and why would I ever use them, when we were looking at the turtle, when I first built Kill, I'm looking at the mechanics behind this shell defense ability, which is, you know, if you're playing a turtle, the reason you want to play a turtle is because they have a big fucking shell that they can crawl into, right? Like that is the fantasy. Cool. And I was looking at shell defense, and what it does is it's interesting. You get, when you're in the shell, it takes an action to go into the shell. When you're in the shell, you get a +4 to AC, which is huge. You get advantage on strength and constitution saves. You get disadvantage on dex saves. But you also go prone. And then it takes a bonus action to come out of the shell. And the thing is like, going prone means that when somebody attacks you with a melee weapon, they get advantage on the attack. Right. And it depends on a lot of things, but like in general, people tend to think of advantage as a +5. Yep. So like, to me, I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, so a dude with a big sword comes up, right? And I fully withdraw into my shell. I get +4 to AC, but he gets advantage on the attack, which is like a +5.
So he's at +1 over.
So like, how is withdrawing into my shell making me less defensive?
Right. It literally, it makes no sense.
And like, okay, it's super niche, but like, if you're in a situation where there's like everybody's fully ranged, then like in a way, like going prone and +4 is like +9 to AC. Like good luck, you know, sort of assassin archer over the bluff hitting me.
Not happening.
So I get it. It's not a completely useless feature, but basically what I said to Sal is like, this is just worse than dodge to me.
Yeah, it's like if you just take the dodge action, you're getting +5 to your AC.
Yeah, and you're still getting advantage on dex saves, I think. So, so like, this is something that I really want to be able to use, but I'm probably just never going to use it because in this case, it's not that it doesn't fulfill the fantasy, but it's just that the mechanics are so shit that it you know. So we came up with, we sort of just agreed to eliminate the prone piece of it, which is sort of generous, I think, on your part to like come to the table with me. But on the other hand, it was like, it just doesn't make sense that you would get weaker going into the shell. And then to kind of like transition into what we were talking about just before the stream, I was telling Sal I had some ideas for sort of a homebrew feat. And again, the goal is, though I think this might be powerful and we have to spend some time dialing it in, the goal is to support a fantasy, right? And the fantasy is sort of like, you know, when you're watching the Ninja Turtles, right? And one of the members of the Foot comes up and swings a sword at your head, and, you know, they sort of like pop their shell into their head, or pop their head back into their shell, and then they, you know, pop their head back out and they say equip or whatever, you know, and then whatever. And so basically what you're watching is they're reacting to an attack. They're withdrawing into the shell as a reaction.
Right. It's a reaction. Yeah.
And the game doesn't support you doing that. So we were talking about sort of a racial feat, which is there's some precedent for. for turtles that basically lets them enter their shell defense not as an action but as a reaction. And I thought, as a part of just kind of tying it up in a bow, we could add that. And entering shell defense doesn't force you to go prone. As sort of like a nice little like suite of features that like could be very powerful, but you know, it could be sort of a combination of like a shield spell and like a buff to your constitutions, your concentration saves and whatever. But evokes a fantasy that you can't really otherwise achieve. And then, like, frankly, the nice thing about playing a home game and not like adventuring league or venture league or you know, having to release fully licensed content,
right?
It's like, if it's too good, we just change it.
Yeah, that's the best part of it. Like your play testing is literally just your fucking game,
right?
Which again, like, sort of, I mean, thank you for and I think that as a DM in general, like, be a little bit more generous to your players if they are, you know, trying to do something cool or want to change something because it just, you know, doesn't feel as good. Be a little bit generous at first and like figure it out. Like, the idea of removing the prone condition from withdrawing into your shell sounds very powerful at first, but it's, I mean, to be honest with you, like, with us playing that, we've been quote unquote testing it, like, the few times that you've done it, it's worked, and it also hasn't worked. Yeah. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I still, like, there are creatures that, because of the power level of the party, there are 4 of you, you know, you guys do well. You all have classes that, or at least we have a couple classes where you deal fuckloads of damage all at once. You have good AC, all this different stuff, and you know what you're doing. Like, you still end up like defeating these combat encounters relatively well, like, throughout the whole thing. And every once in a while, I still roll really well. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing that's going to stop me because I'm the one who rolls the most in the game.
Yeah.
As a dungeon master, you will always roll more than your players, generally, like, at least on an individual level, which is why it's always going to feel like the dungeon master is doing better than you. It's because I just have more opportunities to do better than you, like, when it comes to rolling, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I've hit you more times than I can fucking count, specifically, and you have the highest AC out of anybody in the party. Yeah. And you can continue to have the highest AC even with a reaction. I still hit you just as much as anybody else because I roll the most. Yeah. So the idea of having to balance it with, like, well, they need to go prone and stuff, it's like, well, you're not even helping the player out. It's worked when it's worked, and it didn't when it didn't, and that's how it's supposed to, and that's how the dice roll. And in effect, I mean, hypothetically, it could never work, and it could possibly always work. You know what I mean? That's just how it is sometimes. So if you're a dungeon master and you're a little hesitant about certain homebrew things, as long as it's not glaringly obvious that it's fucking broken, that, like, whatever your player is doing or wants to do, go with it and be a little bit more generous at first, and then if you need to, just dial it back. Like, it's not like you're, again, like you said, it's not licensed content. You can just fucking change it. It's fine. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, man, I think that I saw in chat, we're gonna probably wrap this up, but sort of a way to transition this into the next episode. Aaron brought this up. I can't tell what Michaela said. Also, when you upload the YouTube, make the title "Supporting a Fantasy." That is actually genius. I actually really like that. Too. Supporting a fantasy. That's good. We're gonna that might be my memoir title. We'll have to talk about that. No, but I think that's a great idea. We're gonna upload this to YouTube this weekend. Episode 1, Supporting a Fantasy. I think that's a good idea. But next episode, I saw what Aaron said. I think that's a really good idea. I want to make, and also, like, apparently these do, like, really well on YouTube for no fucking reason. But I think we should go through the classes and subclasses and rate them, and we should make a tier list of them. Just
that's the thing to do.
And I want us to just not give a shit about whatever. I mean, we usually don't, but I want it to be the hottest of fucking takes. Like, I want to look at it and I want to argue with you about, like, whatever and be like, no, this class fucking sucks. I don't care. Like, this is F tier
and dog shit. Let's hit it both from, like, what we kind of think is the power level, which is what most people normally do. But let's also hit it from, like, is this, like, do we just think this is good design?
100%. You know what I mean? Yeah, there are going to be a lot of things that will encompass, like, how we're rating them for sure.
Right.
Good shit.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. All right. Well, catch us next Friday, same time, around noonish Eastern Standard Time. We're going to be doing that live. We're going to be making a tier list. For S tier.
Why don't we do?
Sure.
S is S is suck, right?
Yeah, S
And
is
F
the
is
cool
flirty.
suck. Yeah.
It's from suck to flirty.
Yeah, from suck to flirty. From regular handhold flirtation to just getting absolutely sucked. Terrible. Oh my God, what a great idea. Yeah, good stuff.
Suck is the best one.
Suck is the best tier, clearly, obviously. Yeah, so we'll catch us next Friday for that. We're gonna be making a tier list. Suck to flirty.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, get in the Discord if you have maybe a class you want us to start with.
Yes, please get into the Discord if you have any other ideas or suggestions for the podcast or things that you might like us to talk about. Like we said, already have an idea for next episode, but that doesn't mean that we can't stack ideas or include things that might come up or whatever. But yes, join the Discord. We don't have the keyboard with us right now, so I can't even link it. But once we transition to the offline screen, I'll type it up in the Discord, or in the chat rather. So if you're not in there already, please consider jumping in there, or if you are in there, just run over to suggestions, throw that in there, and we'll take a look at it. The very next thing that's going to be available on the channel is going to be next Tuesday. So join friend of the show Aaron at Little Bog Witch and our producer Michaela as they run Reroll. I will be on there on Tuesday night, I believe. So hopefully we can get, I don't know if you're going to be doing anything, we'll figure it out, but I definitely will be there. I'll be answering some of your more intimate questions there, talking about last week's episode, which was so much fun with Dominic Noble. So that was a good time. So hopefully we will see you then.
Yeah, Michaela will also be, of course, on Reroll.
Did I not say that?
I don't think so.
Oh, Aaron and Michaela. Yes, Aaron at Little Bog Witch and our producer Michaela will be on Reroll. Yes, they will be hosting, so that'll be super tight. Make sure on Monday you guys check out their co-op stream that they usually do. If that's not happening, I know that Aaron usually streams on Mondays as well. So shouts out to Aaron and Michaela. Hopefully you guys will see them on Monday, and then join us once again for episode 20 of A Little Dicey, the Great Nelidian Crown, next Wednesday. So thank you guys so much, and we will see you soon. Matt, so if you want to just like throw the offline, I think it might be reroll offline. Yeah, fuck it, reroll offline, and then we'll hit transition. So thank you guys very much. We'll see you soon. Peace.
Peace.
Hell yeah, good shit, brother.